Thank you, Jessica. Every paper has a story, and I kind of fell into this. I'm actually the editor of the Communications of ACM's Viewpoint column on ethics. And so, as the editor, the first editorial, I'm like, well, fine, I'll just write something. And I wrote something about smart cities and who they're actually good for. Spoiler alert, they're often not good for the people who live there. They're good for the vendors. And that came to the attention of a group of computer scientists in Austria at the Technical University of Vienna, who asked me to come over and present. So I did. And for some reason, they put me on the board, and they asked me to come back from time to time. So this last summer, not this summer, the one before, they had a summer school. So been thinking about how do you make ethical and responsible technologies. That was what we were going to do a summer school about with a bunch of college students. These are mostly among the Technical University of Vienna. These are computer scientists grappling with the problem of ethics and IT. And there are lots of conversations about, do you just have the programmers take one class in ethics, or do they need like two classes? Or do you have like ethics in all the classes? And my argument is that that's the wrong question. So, as I said, I went and did summer school, and they're like, well, we're going to write a book with chapters that's going to be like a textbook for anybody who wants to. And it's like, oh, crap, now I have to actually write this into full sentences and find like references for all the stuff that part of which I knew because I just grew up during it, right? But I found references, and it's actually going to press, I think, with Springer right now. So I'm kind of taking a step back and making an argument. First of all, how did we get here? And then what's a pathway to move from where we are to being able to develop and maintain ethical and responsible technologies? And so part of my argument is that technology is no longer about computing. It's actually about living. That's a huge change. And when you realize that that's a huge change, what you realize is that this adds complexity, right? There was a time when computing was limited to just a particular area. Which area depends on who you ask. AT&T thinks it was about telephone switching, and the military thinks it was about targeting artillery. So what it was about kind of varies a little bit. But now it's about relationships, it's about work, it's about health and fitness, it's about finances, it's about spirituality and religion, it's entertainment, it's about living. And this adds enormous complexity to how you create ethical technologies, because they're in a lot more domains than they used to be. So I thought, well, okay, what the heck am I going to talk about at this summer school? I know, I'll just Google it. If you Google power of technology, you get a lot of results. But the top one says we can use technology to improve our lives and bring us together, or allow it to leave us frustrated. There's a couple of seats down here in the front. Don't be scared. So clearly the Googleverse knows that there are some issues here around how we use technology. And other people other than me have actually looked at this topic. I didn't look through all those references, but I got to thinking about, I'm old enough, my first programming was on a mainframe. I didn't actually use the punch cards, but I had classmates who were using the punch cards on the mainframe. So when you think about the very early information technology, the drivers were essentially organizational needs. Why were the drivers organizational needs? Because they were expensive. They were really expensive to build. And no individual had the money to actually build a mainframe computer to run, right? So there had to be an organization that needed it. The military for targeting, the The AT&T was in that space. There were the earlier business applications were things like running payroll. If you've got 10,000 employees and you want to make sure they get paid. But basically, the drivers were the organizational needs. And they needed profitability and efficiency. And the organization then created, developed, maintained the technology in hopes of having a positive impact on the organization. And if you look at a block diagram of a computer from that era, you've got the program and data provide the input unit, and then you've got secondary storage, primary storage, the control unit, this is all the CPU, arithmetic and logic unit. How many of you have seen a diagram like this? Yeah, where's the person? There's no person in this diagram. They're not even shown, right? And if you look back at, well, there's some people with the mainframe, kind of. There's somebody doing data entry. There's somebody who's playing with the tape storage. There are really not people. They're off in their own machine room. They're far away from any humans, and we're not even going to depict them there. So that's what I'm calling sort of human adjacent. Yeah, we're creating payrolls. We're making checks for somebody, but we don't have to actually show them in the computer. They're not part of the system. And then we move to what I call human aware. The drivers are still the organization's needs, but for the organization to accomplish its goals, they need to actually have people do something. Real people, not just programmers, actual people. So the organization still creates the technology, but now there's an interface. Now there's human-computer interaction. Now the people have to do something to make this thing work. And we still, though, are looking at trying to create profitability and efficiency for the organization. And once you add people, you add complexity, right? Because people are very creative, and there are 8 billion of them, right? So you think you know what they're going to do, but those of you in the human-computer interaction field know that what you think they're going to do and what they actually do may not be are often not the same, right? And we get these use case models. You guys seen diagrams like these? Now we actually have people, well, stick figure people. There are humans, but they're still outside the system. At least we show them. We have a user and we have an admin. We're at least going to depict them as being relevant. So they're kind of human aware. We know that they're there, but they are essentially still outside the system. And when you're doing human-computer interaction, this is when you get the client-server architecture. You go from a mainframe to a client-server architecture and desktop computing, and real people actually have access to the computer. My argument is that we need to move to IT as human-centered. I know you've heard that term. I'm saying really human-centered. I'm saying let's put people's needs right at the center of this, not the organization's needs, the people's needs. The market is a distribution channel. So if you want to have an impact through a for-profit company is one way of doing it, but there are other distribution channels. There are other ways of getting things out. Why are we still building these things to meet the needs of organizations? You can put the humans' needs first when you realize that they are part of a family, part of a community. What makes this possible? We have a cloud-based architecture. We have software as a service. We went from bring your own devices to the organization provides devices. I don't understand that part. None of this now has to be, or very little of this has to be customized. There's a lot of stuff off the shelf and you can grab components. So why are we still thinking about this from the perspective of meeting the needs of organizations? Why don't we start thinking about meeting human needs? Yes, it does increase the complexity, significantly increases the complexity, I'm saying this as though this are an easy thing, and you guys are letting me get away with it. I don't know why, because when you're going to be human-centered, this is really hard. This is really hard. A lot of times, I didn't tell the computer scientists in Austria this, but a lot of times computer science solves a problem by simplifying it. That's one of the tried and true methods. So, the problem is global warming. I'm going to look at this little piece here where I do a simulation of and that's good. We need that. But that's not necessarily going to get you truly human-centered computing. This is really hard. And to do this, we actually have to radically transform, I argue, three things. We have to transform how we think and talk about technologies. We have to think about how we develop technologies, and we have to think about how we use technologies. And partly I'm going to argue here that we are making category errors that are with enormous consequences, and we're not even aware of them. And Ben Schneiderman has talked about this a little bit. We're talking about technologies as though they were people. We're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're talking about smart cities. We're talking about autonomous vehicles. We're talking about fifth generation. We're talking about AI as a partner or a teammate. Intelligence, learning, smart, autonomous, generations, partners, team. Those are people things. We're talking about them as though they were people. Why does this matter? We're making a category error. We're talking about them as though they were people, not things. And ethically, we know that we should love people, not things, and use things and not people. So if we put them in the wrong category, we start treating them wrong. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, this is deep and adaptive pattern matching. If it's pattern matching, you have to think about what's the data that it's using to find the pattern. It's not really being intelligent. I used to say economists following the advice of economists, and now I say, and following the advice of AI, is like driving your car by looking in the rear view mirror. It's using historical data and assuming that the future is like the past. And we saw how disruptive that was when COVID-19 shut down the supply chains. It turns out the future was not like the past and everything broke. So thinking about artificial intelligence as pattern matching, and then where is it getting the pattern, raises important questions. And looking at smart cities, these are urban cyber physical systems. Remember, people talking about the Internet of Things and saying the problem is that we've left out an important adjective, because there's the Internet of Things, but often those turn into the Internet of broken things. Right? And you say a person is broken, that's different from saying a thing is broken. The sensor is broken. So when you're talking about a smart city, the city's not smart. It's got a network of cyber physical systems, and many of them may be broken at various times. How's the chiller going? Not so well for this particular building. Autonomous vehicles, this is a vehicular robot. It doesn't really have autonomy. Autonomy is a state of humans, not a state of machines, except in Terminator, where there are like some problems with it. 5G generations, are we saying that these things can actually have children? I don't think so. All we've got here is a networking standard. It's a new networking standard. AI as a partner or teammate, it's a tool, it's a device. We need to be clearer on the category, because when we make categorical errors, we start to love the things and use the people. And that's a serious problem. If we're going to look at human-centered, so that's the end of my rant. when you get to be my age, they let you do rants. It's great. And then they put them in books and call it an intellectual contribution. So if you're going to be human-centered, my first argument is we need to think about these things differently. My second one is we need to think about how we design them. And the first part of that is thinking about our goals. If our goals are not about corporate profits, what are our goals going to be? Right? And there are lots of possibilities. I really liked the donut economic model, which is attracting a lot of attention in economics, good and bad. But the argument that's being made in donut economics is that what we need to be developing and maintaining and putting our effort toward is creating a safe and just space for humanity. So they're looking at a regenerative and distributive economy, but how do we create and maintain a safe and just space for humanity within an ecological ceiling and based on a strong social foundation? So thinking about human-centered computing as being the kind of computing that strengthens the social foundation, that works within the ecological ceiling, and creates a safe and just space for humanity. There's some good objectives. We can argue about which objectives we should have, but my argument is they should be human-centered objectives. And this one looks like a good set to me. So the first part of the design part is, what are the objectives? Do they have to actually be corporate objectives? Or given that we can actually take advantage of cloud computing, software as a service, all of these things that really have lowered the cost of production and made that the fact that people have smartphones, it opens up opportunities that frankly we didn't have in the 1970s. We simply didn't. The things were too expensive. So given that we've got this possibility, we've got this set of objectives, what else do we have to do in order to design these human-centered systems? Remember, these are people. People are creative, they're complex, they're individuals, they're in families, they're in communities, there are advocacy groups. We need to think about the diverse stakeholders. So it's not enough to just think about what does your manager want in this company, or what does top management want. If you're designing for people, you have to deal with the social complexities of it. And you need to particularly think about which are the marginalized and silenced communities that maybe are not usually at the table. And then you have to do more. You have to think about this as an equal partnership, where you're not coming in to save this community and tell them what they need by simplifying the problem down. You need to think about them as equal partners with complementary expertise, with the ability to solve real problems. You've got the technical part, they've got an understanding of what they're trying to do and how they navigate and exist in the world. And that is equally important if you're going to have human-centered computing. And you need to actually compensate them in some way for their participation, for their leadership, for their commitment, and avoid it being an extractive relationship. You're learning a lot about that in your program here, because we are pretty good at actually thinking about the authentic co-design. Think about the engagement. Who's included? There are communities that are starting to stand up and say very loudly, nothing about us without us. So if you're designing for a particular community, you better not try and do this without them being there. I've heard chatter through the grapevine that the Kai community is arguing about whether Kai should be in Hawaii this year, given the fires in Maui, and that this is maybe an insult to the indigenous people in Hawaii. Has anybody asked the indigenous people in Hawaii? Nothing about us without us. Shouldn't be talking about people if you don't have them at the table talking to you about what you need to know. And you need to think about who leads and how the decisions are made. It may not be you that's making the decision. That's a very different role for many computer scientists. But wait, there's more. That's the easy part. Now I'm pushing computer scientists way out of their comfort level and into some of the social and organizational scientists' sweet spot, which is you can't just change the technology. We're talking about technology in a very complex socioeconomic, technical, legal system. It's an ecology. You can never change just one thing. So when you say, I'm going to create this app and it's going to change everything, well, once you actually ask the people, once you become human-centered and ask them what their needs are, maybe it's not a technical fix. Maybe it's not the technology that needs to change at all. Maybe what they really need is a change in the law, or a change in the infrastructure, or a change in the culture. Then the technology might be part of it, but you need to be thinking about what term I like is complementary assets. So what are the things you need to complement the change that you're making to make it work? You guys are actually living through a really interesting transition that's looking at complementary assets right now. So how many of you drive a propane powered vehicle? None. Right? I lived in Canada for 5 years. I actually had a propane powered vehicle because you could get propane powered vehicles there because you could fill them up at the gas station. Now we're looking at electric cars. What are some of the things you need for electric cars? You need charging stations. Those are complementary assets, right? So thinking about, I'm sure I'll give them this technology. Does there need to be training? Does there need to be infrastructure? Do we need to talk about how this is going to change the processes? How's it going to change the social relationships? All of this stuff is connected. So how do you listen so that you hear these things? I had a friend who said he used to think about the situations in which he needed to listen with elephant ears, right? Not so much the talking, listen with elephant ears so that you really hear what's going on. And often this means a partnership. So when we put you in teams, it's not a punishment, I swear. We're putting you in teams with people who are not like you because you may have the technical part and the other person has the ability to listen in that way, the ability to be attentive to that, and you should teach each other. Or you may be the person who's good at the listening part and get partnered with somebody who's stronger in the technology. So that way we're making stronger socio-technical teams and strengthening the ability for you to work together and hear what's needed and move toward providing help towards solutions. And, you know, sometimes the librarians are best at this. Sometimes urban planning, people from urban planning or social work are better at doing the listening. Sometimes an anthropologist can be helpful. So we're looking at human-centered socioeconomic technical system co-design. Oh my gosh, did she really put all of that in a title? It involved making the box bigger, that's for sure. I told you it got more complex when you had people, and even more complex when it becomes human-centered. We're talking about designing a system that includes people, institutions, technologies, the physical environment, all of that. And by the way, even if you do nothing, all of those elements are constantly changing and co-adapting. Paris, which was one of the first cities to allow little scooters, just said no. They've just banned them after 5 years. So the environment, why? Because people are leaving them everywhere. They're absolutely terrible for people in wheelchairs, people with mobility issues, because now the sidewalk is littered with scooters and they can't get through. And the accident rate and the injury rate is really problematic. And I don't now I'm this my cousins talk about, is this a fact-free conversation? Now I'm going totally fact-free, but thinking like a business school person, if we had public health care, everybody who got injured on a scooter would take money from the public health care system. France has public health care. So thinking about how they made this decision, I don't know, but the whole system is always constantly changing and co-adapting. You thought the construction on campus was constantly changing and co-adapting. It is. The whole world is like that, but some parts are easier to see and some parts are harder. And remember, people are very creative. They are hard to predict, and there are 8 billion of them. They are not going to sit still. They're going to be doing different things. This raises a really important question. How are you going to intervene in this socioeconomic technical system where everything is related to everything and know what the impact has been? You have to actually think about, when I said you can't create an ethical technology because it's going to be used by people in a way you can't predict. If we expect you to be able to predict all the ways the technology is going to be used on the basis of one class in ethics as an undergraduate, we are deeply overestimating your creative capabilities. Maybe we should all, instead of taking ethics, have you take a class in science fiction so you can think about all the things that could happen, right? It's putting too much pressure, too many expectations on one person. What's the alternative? How are you going to keep monitoring it and making changes? So I was talking to a designer at Google recently, and he said there's some people who have epilepsy and they get triggered by flashing lights. And so occasionally you'll see something that says it's a warning. There's flashing lights in this thing on TV. And so if you're photosensitive epilepsy, you may not want to watch this. How do they know? They look at how fast things flicker and how much of the screen it takes up. And so they had these little stickers, right? And they were little line drawings of birds, and they were quite popular. And one of them, the bird was like going to take off to fly, right? And they thought, this is no problem because it's a little sticker. So yeah, it's flickering, not that fast, it's not taking that much of the screen. And then suddenly they were getting people reporting that this was an epilepsy hazard. And they're like, what the heck is going on? And it turns out what was going on was people were taking the little sticker and repeating it over the screen. So the whole screen was going like this, right? People are creative. There are 8 billion of them. The company had a bit of AI sitting on they had a reporting channel. First of all, they had AI on the reporting channel. They identified it and disabled the little icon within 24 hours. Build in, how are you going to monitor what's going on and make changes? Because you can't avoid these things. Things are changing all the time. As I said, the interventions can be social, economic, or technical. All of these, that can be legal. You want to think about how are you going to build on the strengths of people and communities, build on their abilities and assets. Be creative. Don't just imagine all the positive stuff. Imagine all the negative stuff too, right? I know we don't want to think about the negative. Think about the other system components that are going to be affected. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but how do you reduce the negative effects and increase the positive effects? So think about Uber promised to reduce congestion and air pollution. They actually did the study, and what did they find? Increases congestion and air pollution while evading employment laws. Airbnb allows homeowners to earn money, but basically destroys the community in popular locations like Amsterdam and drives up the cost of real estate and decreases the municipal income from hotel taxes. You can't do just one thing. The things are all connected to each other. You need to think about complementary assets. You need to think about, I recently went in August, I went to the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh in Scotland. It's great, but they went to all digital tickets. There are parts of Edinburgh that have no internet connectivity. You go to the underbelly, which is actually a part of Edinburgh, and you're like in some stone something or another, and it's like, sorry, it's not connected in this day and age. So think about the various elements. When you design new elements, what else is needed? Where are going to be the points of failure? When are they going to fail? And what's going to be the backup option, right? One of the things that I'm annoyed about, but I understand we want clean and elegant design, but really, if you're designing for people, how do you maximize human control? Can you turn the light switch on and off? Can you do the laundry in your Airbnb? Yeah. Do you have an informative interface where people actually understand what's going on? The number of times I'm just trying to figure out how to do this as a slideshow in Zoom. Jessica and I were trying to figure out, it's like, well, let's click this button and see what it does. Like, why are we clicking buttons to see what they do? Why don't the buttons tell you what they're going to do? That would be kind of helpful now, wouldn't it? That would put things under human control and allow truly human-centered. And again, remember, it's not fire and forget. You don't just release the technology into the wild and, whatever happens, happens. You need to co-design the system and co-design its management. You need to be there during the implementation and see what's actually happening. And think about, how do you find out what's happening? That's a really important question, because you only find the things that you measure. What are the things you didn't measure? When I was at this summer school, I never was able to figure out how to use the television in my hotel room, which didn't bother me particularly because I don't watch TV, and it was probably going to be in Austrian anyway, which I don't understand, but I was just kind of curious. I think it's a fish tank in the day, it's a fire at night. I did figure out how to turn it off so that it wasn't, glaring all night while I was sleeping. Does the hotel know how many people can't figure out how to use the TV in their room? How would they know if there's someone like me who didn't bother to go tell them? Right? Do they have the channels to get the less heard voices? But you really need to be thinking about ongoing assessment, management of the system, building and communication channels, so that you're sensing, evaluating, correcting the intended and the unintended effects. This is why you don't just go in and provide a technology to a community, but and say, thank you very much, I've written my thesis, I'm gone now, but actually have a relationship with the community. So in closing, technology is a tool. We should be using it to reach people's goals. We need to co-design with diverse and equal partners, especially marginalized communities, focusing on the socioeconomic technical system, the initial analysis, the intervention of the design, continuously monitor, manage, and improve the system, and with an aim towards strengthening the social foundation, meeting the human needs within an ecological ceiling. So my question to you is this a viable path forward? Sometimes it's hard to tell when things have changed and when they just look different. My argument is things have really changed. We've gone from mainframe to client server to ubiquitous computing. Most importantly, cloud architecture, software as a service, the cost of production has gone way down. There are different affordances. We can do it now, but we need to change how we think about design and manage the technology so that we're not focused on meeting business needs, but focused on meeting human needs by orchestrating the complex sociotechnical system in partnership. And that's all I have. Questions?